See the, oh, it's already recording now. Perfect. So we'll have that forever. Well, thank you for joining. If you haven't met me before, my name is Corey Edwards. I am a Deputy Historic Preservation Officer with the City's Office of Historic Preservation. From staff, we have Shannon Miller, our Director. We have Ginny Hay, our Scout SA Program Manager. Lauren Sage, who I mentioned, is our Management Analyst and has been assisting me with the UDC update process. Rachel Retaliata is one of our specialists, HCRC case managers, and then Stephanie, who was so highly reviewed by you, Barbara, a little bit ago, will be joining as well, I think. So let's go ahead and get started. What we'll be doing tonight is going to be a very quick recap of what we discussed at the last meeting, just for anybody who's new to the conversation. But what we've done is we've gone and added detail to a few of the areas that we've already covered, specifically administrative approvals and notices for those. That seems to be an interesting topic for people, so we'll dig into that a little bit. And then some new items for tonight. We're going to talk about returning applications. So if something's been denied, what is the process for coming back to the HCRC? We're going to talk a little bit about non-contributing status. We had some questions from an individual about that process. And there's also a definition amendment that's proposed related to that we'll talk about. Something that has come up just today and also via email from Tony just 15 minutes ago is coordinating reviews and doing some sort of potentially a preliminary plan review in coordination with DSD for cases that are coming to the HCRC, and we'll talk through some of those issues. And then some other clarifications in the proposed amendments by OHP regarding non-local designation types, and I'll explain all of that later. So you've seen this before. This is just a touchstone in terms of our growing caseload and really the conversation since 2019 when we started talking about UDC amendments is in response to this growing caseload and how we better manage our program. When you combine all of these things, you can see that there's been a consistent rise in total of applications. And so that's going to be our COAs, which are both administratively approved and approved at the commission level, the HCRC, and our demolition reviews. And so that's related to the demolition permitting process, and there is staff time involved in those. And we review a growing number of those every year, nearly, well, actually a little over 600 this most recent fiscal year. Here's a breakdown of that, so you can see about 2/3 of all of the COAs are approved at the administrative level. We do reporting and tracking so that we're able to provide this information. Of all of those HCRC cases, 139 are new construction. That includes multifamily, single family, as well as like accessory buildings on a single family property. And so it's really type of any new construction. That number has also risen every year. And that's important to remember because new construction reviews take quite a bit of staff time. They're usually more contentious and more involved. And so definitely that number means something when we talk about it. We've had 34 landmark designation requests through the HCRC this past year, which is a pretty strong number. Usually that number is around 20 or so. And so it just shows that there's a lot of activity in our historic areas, and a lot of discussions have been prompted regarding potential designation for some sites. So the issues, the challenges with our program is caseload and turnaround time, making sure we're able to keep up with the demand, that we are providing quality reviews in the amount of time that we have to do them. That includes kind of managing administrative functions related to that. So meeting posting requirements, all of this sort of online presence for commission meetings, creating the agenda, creating the files, publishing everything, doing the notices. Customer support, and so our applicants in the COA process, what does that involve? Do we do site visits? Do we coordinate with them on application materials? Do we do consultations beforehand? All of that presents time constraints that we need to deal with. And then it's not just staff, it's our commissioners as well. And so we have 11 volunteer commissioners that serve on the commission, and we want to make sure that their time is well spent and that they're able to focus on the items that they need to focus on. And then also ongoing perception of inconsistent outcomes. We see this very often and frequently at the commission level. Something that was approved at my house, or something that isn't approved at my house was approved down the street, and why is that? And so making sure that our policies and process in place is steering us towards consistent and predictable outcomes is really important. So just to recap, we have been meeting with a task force since summer of 2019. Obviously, that went on pause for about a year and a half as the city responded to the pandemic. But beforehand, we had quite a number of recommendations that have informed what we're going to talk about tonight. That task force included participation from neighborhood representatives, land use experts in the field, design professionals, architects, landscape architects, several advocacy groups like the Conservation Society and the Westside Preservation Alliance, as well as city staff and council staff. The full membership of that task force is available on our website for the project. And the task force worked in 4 areas. We talked about the landmark designation process, the HCRC rules of procedure, changes to the COA review process, which includes administrative approval, and neighborhood infill. We're going to focus on really number 1 and 3 tonight. There's a few areas where we're going to focus in on a few items related to those issues. I know there's probably still interest from a few people in neighborhood infill, and so there's going to be plenty of opportunity for additional conversations. But with some of the questions that came up this week, we wanted to make sure that we're focusing our time to address those and have discussion. So very quickly, recap on the landmark designation process updates. So as you will recall, there's really kind of 2 scenarios when there is a question about landmark designation. There's a scenario when it is owner initiated. So they are opting to landmark their property through a rezoning, a change in zoning request. And that follows a pretty simple path from HCRC to the Zoning Commission to City Council for adoption. Landmark designations where there is no owner consent can be initiated several ways and is a much trickier path, especially considering some requirements under state law that we're obligated to meet. And so this is an overview, and we'll come back to a similar slide in a bit. But in general, the question that we are asked quite often is, can anybody just apply to have my property designated or a property that they don't own? And really the answer is no. What somebody who's not the owner of a property may do is submit a request for review of historic significance. And that really raises the question about eligibility. Eligibility is different than designation, and I'll kind of show why. And so this is actually language that is proposed in the amendments. The first paragraph you see at the top is actually existing language. The second paragraph below is added. And really it's distinguishing these 2 different processes. So the process by which a owner can rezone a property, or the process by which a third party or somebody that's not the owner can ask the question about eligibility. And so this is some of the language, and again, this will be available for more in-depth discussion as we kind of get into the public input process and review. But what item 2 is clarifying that requests made by a person who does not represent the property owner can be made by submitting a request for review of historic significance. And then very clearly further on, it says such request does not initiate the historic designation process. And that's really important, and I'll explain where this question falls within the overall designation process in the next slides. Resulting from the task force meetings, we are proposing updates to the application requirements for a third party request for review of historic significance. Included in that is a petition with names and addresses of individuals. We had drafted 30. We got feedback from the Conservation Society that they prefer 15. This is still kind of an open discussion, which is why I have that colored in, just so you can see that it's a placeholder. But really it is, a number of individuals where it's more than one person initiating the designation, and that's really kind of the recommendation from the commission. And so we can continue to talk about what that number is. Some people thought it should be 1,000, some people thought it should be 100, some people thought it should be 10. And so really we're kind of trying to find that middle ground of what is a reasonable threshold to meet that requirement. It also would require notification of the Registered Neighborhood Association and related council office. And then with that application, we would require research documentation as well as a written statement of significance as to why that individual believes that the property is eligible for designation. This is a completely free process. We believe it needs to remain accessible to the public, and so we are proposing an application fee for somebody to be proactive and initiate this question. But we are proposing a fee for something that is essentially an appeal of a previous review. And so in an instance where staff has previously evaluated a property for eligibility, and maybe we said it's not eligible and somebody disagrees and wants to ask the question to the HCRC at a public hearing setting, there would be an application fee that applies in addition to all the normal things that are required for the application. In addition to the application fee, there would be a statement as to what additional evidence was not previously considered in staff's review. And we are kind of considering this an appeal of staff's determination to the HCRC. So if a member of the public does not agree with the outcome of staff's review for eligibility, so say something came in for demolition, we reviewed it, we did not find it was eligible and are prepared to issue a demolition permit, somebody could still initiate this process if they were able to meet all the application requirements. Any questions about that? Go ahead, Barbara.
So when does the neighborhood get notified, and who do you use to do that notification? Who do you notify?
Yeah, we have a policy that has been in place for a number of years and most recently modified this past year to expand access to the notifications. Mm-hmm. But essentially, we do those reviews normally within a 30-day time frame. And so following the initial completeness review, we go ahead and send the public notice to anybody that has subscribed to receive those alerts. We do it through a constant contact email service subscription. So if you go to our website, you can choose what type of alerts you want to receive from us. I will say now for the record that the city's kind of policy for how those alerts happen is changing. So we're all moving to the SA Speak Up platform, which I know some of you are familiar with. And so that'll be a transition over the next few months to make sure we don't lose people as we're trying to continue our work and continue with the notices, and making sure that we can get those people that are currently subscribed move over to the new services.
But how does that notify? The Speak Up is something you have to get into to use.
Yeah,
how's it that you notify?
This has all happened very recently, and so this is a conversation that's going to be happening with our GPA department, and so we'll be making sure that there's no disruption of service, but just know that people will still receive emails. It just may be a different.
Okay, so do they go to the neighborhood in which this property is, and is that what happens also? I mean, do you notify the neighborhood based on the registry?
So yeah, where it's located, we're going to send a notice to the Registered Neighborhood Association, the Council District, as well as anybody who's subscribed to the alerts. Okay,
so the alerts, just bear with me because I get the demolition alerts. Huh? Is that in the same place that I sign up for other alerts?
That's what this is. And so if we have, those alerts come out for a few reasons. They go out if there's a demolition. Right. If there is a demolition, just know that we are already reviewing it as part of the 30-day window.
Yeah, but you have to sign up for that. I remember you have to click something on development services, right?
Well, it's actually on our website. And so you would subscribe to that list.
Okay.
From our service.
It's called Constant Contact right now.
Yep. Let me just.
Okay, that's all right. Just I mean, I just I sign up for these things, but I have no idea where it starts. And
yeah. So if you're looking at our website, it's this link here with the little.
I think I did that. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and so you can receive the HCRC notices. Demolition alerts is the one we're talking about. So this will look a little different in the months to come, but just know that's the policy.
So I shouldn't worry about it right now. I'll wait.
Don't worry about it. No.
And so this GPA Speak Up business, who's working on that? Just staff? Is there anybody besides staff? And the reason I'm asking is that fact, 42% of San Antonians 60 and older, which is 1 out of every 5 San Antonians, does not have digital access.
Barbara, I hear you. I think that's a different meeting.
Well, it's playing into that, which is what I asked, was who's working with the GPA department on this issue. Is it just staff? Is it just your staff, some of your staff and some of their staff?
Yes, I mean,
Okay,
GPA
that's all.
is the lead.
That's all,
Okay.
that's all. Okay, thanks.
I have a question. It has to do, are you hearing me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. It has to do with the third party thing. But how are the neighborhoods supposed to know what has been previously inventoried? And what you might have, the OHP might have an opinion about?
Yeah, so we are talking about recent evaluations. And so, as you know, there is a process by which somebody can request a historic assessment. And so generally, we're considering like a 5-year window. Those are valid for 5 years. And so these would be recent decisions. It would, if you were interested in a site that had come through and was noticed and wanted to know the outcome, like we would provide you the outcome so that you would have the ability to respond. But these are, yeah, this is what was in mind when this was created is instances where a review was prompted by a demolition permit. And so it's that same 30-day window. And as you know, at the end of the 30 days, a decision is made. And so it would all happen at that time.
But my neighborhood has been told by OHP that they have done inventories like windshield surveys and things like that in order to evaluate properties in the neighborhood. And I have no idea what the results of those surveys are. I don't know what you have inventoried. I don't know what your opinions are about parts of the neighborhood.
Right. So that does not take the place of like an individual assessment for eligibility. So it's what you said. It's a window survey. And so we're trying to get a sense of what building types and ages exist where. And that information is available through mapping, and that's a Jenny question. But it is a different, like we wouldn't reference a windshield survey to take action on a demolition permit that fell within the 30-day review criteria.
Okay, I'm not really sure what information you use then when you're making your review. You send somebody out to look at the place? And then do you notify the neighborhood about it? You just go on, leave the neighborhood to try to fend for itself in defending this place.
So we have a policy in place for when we pull a property for a 30-day review.
Yeah.
And it's based on proximity to historic districts and eligible historic districts, proximity to NCDs. And so that's when, so you receive those notices. And so you know that we're reviewing a demolition permit for eligibility. Okay, let's maybe discuss if there's a disconnect that I'm not understanding, then let's maybe discuss that later. This is a small group, and so feel free, like if you do have a question or comment, just jump in. I think we'll be good to do it that way. Okay, the next kind of bucket is the HCRC rules of procedure, and I don't plan to spend a lot of time on this, but just to recap, we are proposing an increase to the membership of the commission. It would essentially be doubling in size to establish a new board to review compliance and sort of technical type cases. And then also would allow us to have alternates that serve on the full HCRC. And so this is kind of what that looks like. The full HCRC would continue to meet twice a month. They would remain kind of design focused. And so reviewing new construction projects, additions and alterations to landmarks and properties in historic districts, site elements like landscape designs, driveway placement, those types of things, as well as signage. And the new board, the Compliance and Technical Advisory Board, would be meeting to once per month to seek compliance resolution. So in cases where work was done without approval or in excess of the approved scope, as well as looking at cases where the type of material and more of a technical aspect is required to consider a change to a property. And so replacement materials in terms of like windows, roofing, porch details those kind of like in the weeds kind of conversations would potentially go to this board as well.
And what will be the notification for that?
So these would be the same thing. So the CTAB would function just like the HCRC in terms of the type of meeting and the way that it's noticed, the way the agendas look. It's really a matter of which type of cases get placed on which agendas.
Thank you.
And we kind of came to this conclusion by looking at really past agendas, and these numbers are pretty consistent where, once a month we have about 10 to a dozen cases that kind of fit this description that could potentially be placed on that agenda. So what that would do is place those on this one time per month agenda and free up kind of space at the full HCRC so that they can focus on these type of cases. Those members would also be able to serve on the subcommittees. So potentially greater participation at both the design review committee as well as our demolitions and designations committee. And I think everybody's familiar with kind of that subcommittee structure.
But wait, hold on 1 second though. So the people on the CTAB can serve as alternates and also can serve on these committees. And will they have the same level of designation that the city requires right now for the nomination for the HCRC members?
Yeah, so one question that I think what is confusing is that this looks like one is kind of reporting to the other, and that's not the idea here, is that it's really kind of two separate and equal bodies. They're just
But that's why I asked, will they have the same, how we have, like, you have to be an architect and you have to be
oh, well, sure.
okay,
yeah,
well, that's what I wanted to ask.
There used to be language in the code that aligned with state law for those type of
And
qualifications.
they'll have the same training?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But I will say that there's been less focus on like the categories. The state law doesn't include those anymore, and a lot of times the council person is going to appoint who they want to appoint, and so sometimes the categories kind of get shuffled around. But yeah, I think the idea is that membership on this board would hopefully have experience in dealing with historic building materials, historic construction techniques, condition assessment. And so, but I don't think we want to fully limit it to that.
We don't want to fully what?
Limit membership to somebody that specifically has materials conservation experience, because I mean, it'd be great if we could find 11 people in various council districts to do that, but I think it could be challenging to fill those seats that way. Okay. I'm going to move on to the COA process, and this one has more bullets. And so there, previously, or actually currently, the process and review criteria for a certificate of appropriateness live in actually 4 different sections of code. And so what we're proposing is to consolidate those 4 sections into a single new section that kind of covers everything, as well as introduces a few improvements. That would include application requirements and completeness review, clarifying amendments to that, providing additional clarity to the conceptual review process, and remove any sort of ambiguous language related to final approval. I don't even like calling it final approval. Really, we're talking about when a COA is reviewed and taken action on. But most people know what final means. Expand administrative approvals and adopt a change to the decision period for that, and we'll talk about that in more detail here in a little bit. Expanding public access to items that are under review, and where those are available online, and I've been getting a lot of feedback this week about that, and so we'll talk about that in particular, as well as addressing repeat applications. If something's been denied, what is the process for coming back and getting a second stab at the process? So as background, conceptual review, what it is, what it isn't, is generally considered review of a schematic level design. We all, I think, agree that it's important to get that feedback early in the process as possible. The idea is that somebody can come and get feedback from the commission prior to doing full design development, which is costly to do. and it's costly to change. So if there is a change required by the commission, then it would be very difficult to do that at the end of design development. And so that's why it's important to come early in the process. This is mostly taken advantage of in new construction cases before that design development happens. So the questions are usually pretty simple at the beginning. How big can my building be? Where can it be on the site? Which way should it face? Some of those early design schematic concepts are what are introduced at the conceptual level. There is no, by code, no defined application for conceptual review, nor required application materials, and there's not a process by which it can be appealed. And so what we're kind of doing is clarifying in our proposed amendments, which I'll actually share in the coming slides, about what is required in order to complete an application for a COA, or final approval, as many people refer to it, and when something is conceptual, when it doesn't meet those requirements. And this also, for context, OHP staff does review all construction permit sets related to the project. And so we are very much rolled into the permitting process and doing those kind of quality reviews to make sure that whatever gets a permit is consistent with the COA that was issued.
Could you go back to that for a second, because I'm not clear about this then. So the OHP reviews the construction permit sets, and where do the construction permit sets come from?
So when somebody submits for a permit, they are submitting a building set through development services that are reviewed by anybody that needs to review it. And so we are often one of the reviews. That also includes Public Works Department, and it mostly includes DSD. So they're going to do their building.
And do you know what instrument they use that you see to review?
Sure, it's digital now. So we're using the BuildSA platform, which is Excella often referred to as. So all the comments are in one place, and we're able to do it all electronically. Prior to that, there were giant rolls of plans that were in this building that we would go and borrow.
Right.
Yep.
So here's my question too. Looking at the HDRC agenda, just yesterday, it was very difficult to see what an applicant was applying for. It didn't say certificate of appropriateness, conceptual review. What are the different categories?
On the agenda, you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
how's somebody supposed to know what an applicant's applying for?
We usually do include in the caption language if something is conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Otherwise, it'll just be the request, and so
request for what? I mean, it just didn't. It wasn't clear what the application was for.
Yeah, I don't. Let's put a pin in that. I'm not sure I follow, because we do include descriptive language in the captions for each item.
Okay, thanks.
So I might just need to pull that up and we can kind of look at it. Okay, so as we start getting into UDC amendments, you will notice that there's often things that are underlined in blue. The blue underline is an addition to the language. And then in some of the future slides, you'll see red strike through, and that's an omission. And so we're actually proposing a addition just to this section that talks about completeness review. And so when we get an application for a COA, this is the section that we reference for the completeness review. And we are adding a statement that says when it's determined by the commission to lack sufficient documentation, then they consider it for conceptual review only. Somebody is requesting to annotate the content. I'm going to assume that was a error, but let me know if you would like to mark up my screen. And so the reason for that is that it already says that the HCRC is the appellate agency for the purposes of completeness review. And so if we're working with an applicant to review their application, if we determine it's incomplete, then there's already a path for them to go to the HCRC to determine completeness. And so this allows the HCRC to formally determine incompleteness or to take action for conceptual review versus for a COA. This language that describes what conceptual review is existing. There's nothing wrong with it, and so we are not proposing changes. But another place we are proposing a change is here. And this was in another section that talks about the decision on a COA following commission approval of the design. And this language was defining final design as 80% working drawings. So what we have actually done is, and another problem is that this 80% kind of definition wasn't defined anywhere else but this section. And it also wasn't included in the application requirements for a COA. And so what we are choosing to do is to reinforce the COA application requirements to include measured and to scale line drawings. And the level of documentation is going to vary on the type of request. And so the type of architectural drawings that you might submit for new construction are not going to quite be the same as what you might submit for a alteration to a building. And so we have actually kind of gone request type by request type and are updating the application requirements to best address each request type, state what the documentation required is. Any questions on conceptual review? These are pretty minor tweaks, but I think that they do pretty large things because it allows somebody to come to the commission for a final design prior to full design development. Now, I know that is also related to a question that has come up today, and we're going to talk about that later. But just kind of for background, this was one of the ways that we think we can improve some of the conflict between conceptual and final review that we often see at the hearings. So we're going to talk about administrative approval, and this was on the previous presentation. This was last kind of looked at about a little more than 10 years ago with the development of the Strategic Historic Preservation Plan and some UDC amendments that followed the adoption of this document. But one of the recommendations was to expand access to administrative approval. And so through the public input
This is
process,
a recommendation from this particular document you're showing us?
Yes, and this is 2009. So this is
right.
Quite old. So about 10 years ago at the UDC update process, there was public input to develop which items were now eligible for administrative approval and expanded that list to go beyond kind of what was available before, which was really just kind of repair and maintenance. And so there were new kind of smaller projects that were now eligible for staff approval at the administrative level. And so we've kind of gone through that same exercise again with this effort. So starting with the task force in 2019, we began to look at HCRC agendas, things that were routinely landing on the consent agenda or routinely approved with certain stipulations. And so what we are proposing is to expand the list again based on kind of that study. And there's two kind of new terms that we're proposing. There's expedited review, which is actually the thing that's not changing. Anything that's currently eligible for administrative approval, we aren't really tweaking that list a whole lot. We're just calling it something different. We're calling that expedited review, and that would occur within the same kind of time frame that they are now. And so either the same day that we get them and determine that they're complete and eligible for administrative approval, or if we're working with the applicant to answer questions, or if it came in on a weekend, it might be 1 to 2 business days before we can approve those. And so again,
where are the categories for those?
So expedite, this is anything that is currently in the UDC today for administrative approval. And so that includes repair and maintenance projects, very small rear additions, very small kind of parking pads in a backyard space. And so there are quite a number of projects that are included, but they are pretty routine and minor in nature. And I think the code actually says that. But that's what that list is. Now, again, we're not bound to approve a request because it's on that list. The list simply gives staff a reference for decision making. If it's not something that is normally included on the list or clearly not intended to be on the list, then those would require HCRC review. Okay,
and so that list is in the UDC. Is that what you're saying?
It is.
Okay, and can you give me the number of it so I can?
I believe that is section 35611.
Okay, thanks.
And I mean, I have all of this stuff like when we get through the slides and we're kind of discussing, depending on how much time there is and who's sticking around, I'm happy to pull that up and just kind of show it. We can skip through it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So what is proposed to be expanded is this new standard review item. So standard review would be a longer review period for items on this expanded list. And so just to repeat, anything that's currently on the list isn't changing, and we would call it an expedited review. We're introducing a new review type that is a little bit longer and includes these new types that are eligible for administrative approval. The reason we're doing that is because they're no longer minor in nature necessarily. They might be a larger scope than what people are used to, and so we want to make sure that we're providing a reasonable period of time for people to see and review the proposal and provide comment. And so we're going to talk about notification and opportunity for comment because I've gotten a lot of questions about that, and especially related to your comment, Barbara, about digital access and kind of bridging that gap and making sure people have access to things. So the new items that are proposed are rear additions. And just for context, I put in some quick numbers. We've had more than 130 of those just this year alone. So that's potentially a large chunk of cases that could be eligible. So let me back up. This wouldn't be any rear addition. So we've had 132 additions total. That doesn't mean all of these would be approved administratively in this proposal. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, who decides that?
So it would be staff with direction from the code, and the code would be adopted by everyone involved through the public hearing process through HCRC and City Council.
And so we don't have yet the specifics on the language of that?
I can show it to you. Yeah, let's do it.
Well, only because rear additions, especially now with ADU land, is a whole nother game.
So rear additions are not ADUs.
I know they're not ADUs, but when you talk about putting two pieces of, two living units on one piece of land, and then you've got rear additions, and that makes it more dense. The density issue begs additional questions that haven't been asked before. In terms of setbacks from the primary building, in terms of, okay, so if you do an ADU and then you want to put something else on the back of the primary residence, how does that affect the ADU?
Sure. And just to be clear, we are not proposing to approve any rear addition. All this would do is make them eligible for staff to even consider it for administrative approval. And so it would still have to meet all of the lot coverage requirements. It would have to meet all of the historic design guidelines that apply to that project. And so we're still reviewing them as we would in an HCRC case. It's just a quicker path, and it basically reduces the number of cases that are landing on the agenda for all of the streets, as we talked about in the earlier slides. So the administrative approval process in general is here in UDC section 35611. This is a Word document where I have the proposed amendments, but also this is available by visiting unicode.com and pulling up the UDC.
Okay. Now, where can we see this?
I would.
So the green marks are what we're getting rid of. Is that right? Is that always standard in the city?
Okay,
I mean, the blue marks.
So if you just Google City of San Antonio Municode.
Well, I know how to do that, but I'm talking about your coloring parts of it.
Okay, well, let me first answer the question of where anybody can see this now. Okay, that is at Municode. So the current provisions of the code are here. You'll click on the UDC if you are landing there. You will go to Article 6, Historic Preservation and Urban Design.
Right.
That's where most of the stuff is going to live. You're going to go to Division 2, Historic Preservation, and then Section 35611, Administrative Approval. And so this is the current provisions of the code. As you can see, it speaks to ordinary repair and maintenance items, as well as the following exterior alterations, which were included in that expanded list from 10 years ago. And so this is the work that was done to expand that list. Under new construction includes rear ADA ramps, rear porches, rear decks. So it was really looking at more opportunity for applicants to get a staff level approval without going to the full commission when appropriate to do so. Now, we send things that are on this list to HCRC all the time if they're not consistent with the rules and regulations we have in place. So it has to meet all of the historic design guidelines and anything that applies in order to get this administrative approval. So just keep that in mind. So then what is on the screen now is what will be available soon, and these are draft amendments. We are actually not proposing changes here, but you'll see that it's blue underlined because I'm actually numbering it now. And so that change to number it means that we need to amend the code to organize it that way. We are proposing this language. All applications are subject to a completeness review in accordance with this chapter. This is here because a lot of people view administrative approval as a shortcut. And I might have said that word earlier, and I didn't intend to. In other words, the administrative approval has the same completeness review criteria as if something's going to the HCRC. You still have to provide accurate drawings. You still have to provide the photographs. It's not a lesser documentation requirement just because it's a staff level approval. And so all the information should be there to make a decision. Here, all applications must meet the minimum application requirements outlined in Appendix B, which we can also go to later on. All applications must also demonstrate conformance with the historic design guidelines or other adopted guidelines and standards in order to be eligible for administrative approval. The change to add standard reviews are actually at the end of this list. And so we're calling it a standard 10-day review. Requests that are eligible, which do not allow for expedited review, may be approved following a 10-day completeness review. Staff reserves the right to refer any request to the Historic and Design Review Commission for any reason. At any time, the Commission may adopt policy documents consistent with the Historic Design Guidelines to inform administrative approval. And those are also, as you know, in the works, so that we have additional guidance for applicants to be successful in these types of requests. So fencing, porches, additions, some window fenestration modifications, new construction related items. But again, this just talks about carports. We're not talking about new houses or multifamily or anything like that. These remain small scale. And then additions, any rare addition that is fully consistent with the historic design guidelines. And I think we're going to be talking about that one the most. A few other things that are on here, a finding of historic significance reviewed in accordance with the section that's about. Partial demolition of a non-contributing resource, which is something that is done in practice now. It's allowed in another section, which is referenced here. We're just placing it here to be clear. And then we are allowing the Commission from time to time to designate additional work types for administrative approval with the adoption of any additional standards and guidelines.
So where is this? Where is this now that we can see? I can't see it.
This is, oh, I'm sorry. You can't see it?
Well, it's too small, so where is this?
Well, this is currently on my computer. And
right, I know, but you know what I mean. Where can I see it?
Yeah, taking a step back, I mean, I think everybody has heard information and presentations on the UDC process.
Right.
And our goal is whatever is submitted by this department to be reflective of public input. And so we're having this conversation now as staff works to finalize the language so that when we do submit it for the process and additional public input, we've already had conversations. And so that's why we have.
Well, is this one of those conversations?
This is it.
Okay, well then I need to get a copy of it. I can't see it.
That's fine.
Please. Because I really want to, I think this is really an important part of things. And aside from my main concern, which is the notification of administrative approval.
Well, let's talk about it.
Okay.
Let me make this full screen again. I hate that it starts me over every time, though.
I know. C-tab. And what's that called? What's that stand for?
Compliance and Technical Advisory Board.
What was the first word?
Compliance.
Compliance and Technical Advisory Board. Okay, thanks. I'd write that down because it's going to.
Okay, let me get to where we were.
And do they also get paid $20 a time or something to go to a meeting? Does HCRC people?
They're going to get paid the same amount as a regular commissioner, which is $0.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I always want to just bring them new kinds of snacks. Poor things.
They do get snacks.
I know they do, but it was, okay. So the other thing you can send me, right? What thing is on your computer? Where can I get that or something?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Thanks.
They're just, we're actively working on them, and so there will be subsequent drafts.
Right, just of a draft, Don't take it to the Supreme Court.
Yes, of course, it would have a draft watermark on it, Monica. But just know that there might be future versions of it. So
All right.
I'll have to keep you updated if I give you a printed copy.
Okay, thanks. That case isn't. I can see this. Yeah.
Okay, so we have numbers tied to some of these, just so you can see kind of ballpark the volume of the types of requests that are related to this. But again, I think it'd probably be about 20 to 25% of all of these would actually be eligible for administrative approval, just based on looking at how many are being referred to the commission. And so it wouldn't be this full volume. It would be, I think, on a monthly basis in your own neighborhoods, you would probably see a handful come through for notice. And so we'll talk about that volume, keeping up with that, and how you might get notice. And just again, additions. This is the type of addition we're talking about. And so 2 different additions here, examples, where you can see they're low in scale, they're subordinate to the historic roof form, they meet the guidelines. The materials, although you can't tell in the drawings, we would have the material specifications to make sure that they meet the guidelines. So we're not interested in approving anything crazy. Like, we don't want you coming after us. Like, we want you to have faith in the process. And anything that wasn't consistent with the guidelines or out of scale or any of those reasons that relate to how they're reviewed would be referred to the commission for a public hearing. I think there is a question about what would happen if you received notice of a case that was moving forward for administrative approval. Oh, Monica, did you have a question?
Yes, it's a comment as much as it is a question. The examples that you provide for what would be potentially approved administratively for an addition is good, and what wouldn't be and what would go to HDRC is accurate. However, I think about 99% of the cases are somewhere in that gray area. They're not that cut and dry.
Yep.
And they often change as a result of public input. So I think that has to be acknowledged and accommodated, because we're living in that gray area.
Yeah, and I think where there is gray area, like, we would never default to just approving it. Like, we would always default to sending to the commission. And so that's what the 3rd bullet is cases would be forwarded to the HDRC in instances where there's a discrepancy or a question regarding the interpretation of the guidelines. And so if we don't feel confident in it, that's one reason. If we missed something in our review, or if it's out for notification and somebody says, hey, I don't think that this citing is consistent with the guidelines for this reason, that would be another reason to forward to the HDRC. What I don't want to give is the false impression that we would send it to the HDRC for any reason. It's maybe, I don't like how many people are staying in, my neighbor has too many kids and he doesn't need that many rooms and they're too loud. That can't be a reason to send it to the HDRC. It has to be related to the rules in place for the review. The review period would be similar. So I think the other concern that I'm hearing is, okay, we now have to review these things that are coming, and we don't have time for that. Just remember, it is a 10 business day period, which is really longer than what you get for the HDRC agenda. So we send out a preliminary, and there's usually a full week in between the preliminary and the final agenda. And so this would be a two full weeks that these cases would be out there and available for input. And I'll admit, like, we don't have all the details figured out. Like, we don't necessarily know what the notification looks like. It might be a website where you go to and receive them. It might be expanding the way that we do our preliminary agenda notifications now. It might be an email every time that we get an application. And I have concerns about that, just because I know that that's how things can get lost. And so we're looking at that, and we're open to suggestions and open to feedback and kind of finding a solution that works. If we get to where we think that this is too complicated and it's not going to work, then we're open to pivoting as well. This is a recommendation that came from the task force. A lot of people were involved. A lot of you all were involved in those conversations. Mm-hmm. And we have to find a way to make sure that due process is being given to these cases, but not necessarily by throwing everything at HDRC, because we really are trying to keep those agendas low so that they can focus on the items they need to focus on.
Well, my question is, how are you going to do that? There are so many of these requests that include the kitchen sink. I mean, they have everything in them.
Well, I'm making an assumption that you would be interested in the ones in your neighborhood. Somebody feel free to interrupt me if they don't think that's correct. If you think you would be looking at items outside of your individual neighborhoods, because I think that the numbers would be pretty low based on this slide. Oh, I haven't gone there yet. I'm sorry. So we did a little exercise where we're looking at kind of the volume. These are our largest districts. We see the most activity in really these 5. Dignity Hill has, actually Monte Vista has, no, Monticello has the most administrative approvals. And so we're talking about kind of a small percent, probably less than 10% of this administrative approval number would now fall into this new standard review. And so we're really talking about just a handful, maybe even 5 or less on a monthly basis. Over the course of a year, I think it would be maybe 1 or 2 dozen. So I don't, it's not a greater load than is already coming through the HDRC process.
So does the incomplete, what does that mean?
So this is just for reference. We get applications all the time that don't pass the completeness review. And so they don't have the sufficient documentation. They don't have the required documentation. And we are required by code to take action on those within that completeness review period.
And so, is there a document that the staff fills out that shows what is incomplete?
We do that in writing through email to the applicant. We're required to do it in writing.
I mean, do you have a form that tells you what's complete and what's not? I mean, when it's not, what they did, what they're.
When that notification writing occurs, we inform them what is required to complete it, and we reference the section of code with the application requirements.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is there in your online somewhere here on your website what you have to submit, and then you check off what they do and don't have? Is that online?
Yeah, it's actually,
okay. Just tell us. That's okay.
It's in the application. So you have to acknowledge what is required in your request when you submit to us.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So Corey, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So if this is only affecting a handful here and there of admin cases to take off of HDRC, and I noticed that our neighborhood is the winner of the HDRC cases.
And complete applications.
Yeah, are you going to, then I'm sure there is going to be some sort of cost benefit analysis to determine whether the compensating notification and other things that need to be done are truly going to be worthwhile. So I assume that has not been explored too much yet.
What do you mean? The cost to do the notifications?
Okay, so we get an increase. We have other cases like additions, larger additions, replacement of windows, new construction that will go through an admin COA process instead of an HDRC. I would imagine that neighborhoods would be, and residents would be notified, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I would imagine that to do that in an expeditious way that really gets to everybody would have a cost associated with it also.
It would depend on if there was some sort of new tech platform we had to pay for to do that. I don't think there is. I think it's all existing. And so, those kind of costs aren't really counted because they're just absorbed because we're already doing them.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if anything, the hard costs of, the physical signs that we place on a property for an HDRC notification have obviously a cost. Like, it's not a great amount. So there's not much there.
Have you thought about doing that for some of the admin COAs? Because I think I sent you some information a little earlier today after doing a little searching, but more than 40% of seniors or people over the age of 60 are not connected digitally. And so I know some neighborhood associations still use bandit signs to notify people of the neighborhood association meetings. And that's really what notifies people. The existing zoning signs and HDR signs probably cultivate more interest among regular neighbors.
Mhm.
So have y'all thought about using that method for the increased administrative cases?
I have. I mean, it's an option.
Okay. But I'm really impressed to see the numbers from our neighborhood. And that is a concern about administrative approvals, that our neighborhood is just so active. It is the wild, wild west in the east, on the east side. And I'm concerned that it will only exacerbate or additional administrative COAs in certain areas, not all areas, certain areas will exacerbate the problems we already have. You know what our area is like in terms of enforcement and violations.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's a concern.
you gave an accurate description. Okay. So this is kind of, we're talking about this now. What would be the frequency of notices? Would it be as soon as an application comes in? Because I do think there's time, would it be kind of weekly? I also think there's flexibility, and we're saying 10 days now and implying like there's 10 days from start of when we got it to when we approve it, but maybe it's everything that came in this week gets approved at this date 2 weeks from now. I don't know. But at that point, it might as well have gone to the commission. So these are all just outstanding issues that we're happy to talk about. Again, method, email, website. I've talked about our Explorer map. We talked about potential yard signs. Monica, just to clarify, I think we were talking about yard signs for the new standard review types, so not for every COA.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you, oh wait, we're eating here. Sorry.
Well, and the notice is, I mean, there is a requirement once you receive a COA to post it on the property so that there is notice that something was approved there. But there's no way that we can place signs for administrative approval. That's not required now.
Yeah, because in some of the expanded items really will have an effect on the built environment in different levels for different historic districts, some more so than others, and will really, I think, have the potential to affect the change of character also. So those are the ones I'd be most concerned with.
Sure. Okay, well, we don't have to solve this today, but this is out there, and continue to think about it. And we're going to have internal conversations with GPA about what options are under the SA Speak Up platform. So
GPA.
hopefully we'll have some more insight into that soon. So also added to the standard review would be a decision regarding the finding of source significance. And so this is that question regarding eligibility that we talked about earlier tonight. There are quite frequently instances where a property owner perfectly well knows that their property is eligible, but they want to demolish it anyways. And so sometimes the initial review by HCRC for eligibility is just an extra hearing that may not be needed if there's interest in going forward to City Council for a decision on the case. So in instances where something is very clearly meeting the criteria for eligibility, we would simply issue the determination that it's eligible, the finding of source significance, so that City Council could review it. If there was ever a disagreement between staff's decision and I guess whether or not it was eligible, then there was always would be a path to the HCRC to consider those. But this would really be those instances where something's clearly eligible, and just with coordinating with the owner, they might have the preference to go forward to City Council to see what the outcome of the resolution is. And because HCRC already has a step in the process, if Council does approve the resolution to proceed with the designation, it makes sense that they would only go to the HCRC that one time in those few instances where something is clearly eligible. We have talked about this. We haven't really dug into it. I don't know that we're going to have time to tonight. But we are providing updated policy documents related to fences, porches, replacement materials, sustainability, greening your home, landscaping, hardscaping, and as well as windows. As you know, we have a policy guide for windows that's been in place for a number of years now, and so also updating that further based on most recent conversations, as well as to address potential changes, the potential addition of fenestration modifications to the standard review list. Okay, let's get to this. So there's a few items that have come up that we have not talked about at any of the previous meetings. We're going to talk about subsequent or returning applications for a COA and what that looks like. I know that Monica in particular had questions about the process for non-contributing status determinations and related decisions for demolition. And we'll go into detail about that. There's a recent question about kind of coordinating reviews with development services early on in the process so that when something goes to HCRC, there's some information regarding consistency with zoning requirements and as well as other kind of development requirements. And then also there are some changes, some omissions that we're proposing in the UDC related to non-local designations, and I'll explain what that is and why. So for subsequent applications, there is an existing provision in the code that we're not sure why it was written the way it was written, and so it's been difficult to interpret for a few reasons that you'll see. But we're going to expand the language to better address the process for which the commission can consider a waiver, and I'll explain that in a little bit. We are going to clarify that the applications themselves must be revised, and there's new language that's going to be introduced to do that. And then really it's up to the HCRC to make that determination if they're going to review an application that's been resubmitted. And so again, this is that UDC amendment language. So red is eliminated, blue is proposed. So how this read originally is that subsequent applications, in the case of a disapproval by the Board of Adjustment, and this is actually in the HCRC section. And so how it's written and how we would interpret it is what would happen if something went to the Board of Adjustment, if something was denied at the HCRC, went to the Board of Adjustment, was also denied, what would that process look like? But really, it should be the same process for if the HCRC denied it, and even if it was appealed or not, what would a returning application to the HCRC look like? Previously, it said it should not be resubmitted for 1 year unless the indicated changes in the plans and specifications required to meet the conditions have been incorporated into the new application. Well, we don't know what the conditions are, and so this presents a challenge. And so what we are doing is providing some clarity as to what the conditions might look like and who decides, and then what would happen if a waiver to consider the application within 1 year was not approved. And so we're proposing that the commission, by a majority of its membership, could waive the time limitation if the application presents substantial new evidence that was not considered in the previous action or incorporates changes that were based on the recorded feedback of the commission. And then until a waiver is granted, the new application shall not be considered complete and is not subject to the normal review timelines for COA until that waiver is approved, meaning they don't have to take action on the COA request. So we think this solves the problem of providing clarity for when somebody can return to the commission, as well as it gives the commission kind of leeway in determining when something has been substantially revised enough to be considered within a 1 year timeline. Does that all make sense? Barbara says no. You're muted, Barbara.
I know, only because when we had this case that came up, the language, we were surprised it came back, and it had been turned down, and I think at the Board of Adjustment it was turned down, and then all of a sudden, ka-chinga, here it comes again. And we were like, what is this? And it was the language of the substantial, wherever that is in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big problem.
It used to say substantial new evidence, period.
That's it.
And so
right.
the issue with the sentence ending there is then there's a question about what is substantial and what is new and what is evidence. And so that's why we're providing this clarification that it has to be something that new evidence that was not considered, so they didn't see it before, so it's new, or it's substantial in that it's incorporating changes that are based on the feedback. So
feedback from the commission, from HDRC,
correct,
when they presented it, or
so
from Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, before this, a change is a change, and so they could change anything in any direction. It could be good or bad, and just return to the commission. And so this provides more direction for what that change should be.
Okay.
It also gives the commission the ability to determine whether or not it's changed enough for them to take action on it.
And then I guess my question to that would be the commissioners themselves. So for instance, now instead of having we're going to have 22 commissioners basically, right?
No,
I mean,
there will be 11.
There'll be 11, but then there's a C tab.
Right, and
that
so
can be alternates.
The commission, an item would return to whichever commission previously acted on it in this scenario.
So, well,
one application would never go to both for any reason. It would go to one or the other.
Yeah, I understand that, but I don't know. I have to think about this. There's something tricky because of these two commissions, and that these guys can be alternates. The C-tab can be alternates to the commission, and how right now it's like, hey, who's coming and who's not coming based on how they voted before. You know what I mean? That's what I'm worried. That's what I'm thinking of. You know, where the commissioners stand, and if now we have 22 versus 11, and that they may not. Let's see.
I mean, we would always want as many commissioners as possible. I think, I understand what you're saying. You're concerned that different people might take action on the returning application.
Well, in terms of the waive of the aforementioned time limitation, that's the, I mean, that seems important. That they can waive the year, because this is a lot of work for neighborhoods.
Keep in mind, this language is there now,
right?
So there's already a requirement that something would have to change in order to come to the HDRC. There's just no guidance for what that means. They could change the color of something and say it's different.
So you're saying that based on recorded feedback, actions, and that they incorporate suggestions or stipulations or whatever from before, that would be the basis of it, not the time.
Exactly. Well, it would be the basis for a waiver of the time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Corey, I needed a little bit more clarification. As you know, it was probably stimulated by our case where
that case is the only time this has ever happened. So yes.
And here we are.
They came back in 2 months and they said it was substantial change, and it was not. And even the stipulations was not a substantial change, what was even asked for in the board adjustments. And so I really like, the question is recorded feedback of the commission. So I think it has to be a little bit stronger about what this feedback is. And I'm probably have to think about it a little bit, because when we were at the board of the BOA, they pointed out things that we didn't really hear about, and that we weren't even aware of. And of course, they don't record that. And then, so we're going back to the same thing, but now the neighborhood knows that certain buildings were, you know, in the historic area that weren't thing. And so we have new knowledge. And so so going back to the older stipulations, you already have a problem with stipulations. Every time they keep coming back, they don't fulfill the stipulations and they keep having it. So this still isn't, it's getting there. And I really appreciate this, but I just need to think about this a little bit, and I'll bring it up to people who fought, you know, that case to see if it needs more clarity, because they had stipulations, you know, and they didn't meet them. And now we have sort of new stipulations.
Sure.
Does it make any sense? I'm trying to.
You know, one of the comments, this is Tony, one of the comments I'd like to make is that, you know, when the IDC code was developed, there was a very delineated interpretation what would be considered a major amendment and a minor amendment with regards to site plan revisions. And it was rather specific. The code is section 35-343.01. And in a way, it added clarity to when the individual had to go back and submit a new application for IDC rezoning. So I don't know whether OHP should look at something of that version, that type, but that helped quite a bit in making a determination what was considered a major amendment to an application as opposed to a minor amendment.
Yeah, I understand that. I think there's too many scenarios. Like one thing I always kind of talk about is approval of an application should be based on general conformance with the guidelines. And so there might be an example where one type of request, there's 5 guidelines that apply to it. And maybe it meets 4 out of the 5 and passes muster and is approved. Or maybe it meets 4 out of the 5, but that 5th one is really important and critical, and so it's denied. And so it's hard to anticipate what guidelines might apply to a particular project that would inform the decision of the commission. And so writing it this way would give the commission the ability to consider those previous recommendations, the previous findings from its review. Maybe it is that one guideline that's really important that's going to necessitate a change in the application to be reconsidered. I think it's hard to anticipate what kind of changes might need to occur to an application type that is undefined in this. Like this is for any certificate of appropriateness, not just a type of not just new construction necessarily. But that's something we can look at. I always like the idea of standardizing things, but I think that this is going to refer it back to the findings from the previous recommendation, which I think is probably a better phrase than what I had before. What did we say? Recorded feedback, previous recommendations. So we'll keep looking at this. Okay, moving on to the process for non-contributing. So for those that are not familiar with this term, in a historic district or when there's multiple buildings on a historic landmark property, they're either going to fall into one of 2 categories. They're either going to be contributing or they're going to be non-contributing. And contributing essentially means historic. So it's treated as a historic designated property. And really anything is considered contributing in a historic district until a determination is made that it's non-contributing. And this is an important distinction because it's going to improve, it's going to inform the process by which a demolition is reviewed for that building. And so this is a building by building determination that's made for buildings that are in a historic district or are accessories to a historic landmark. This is something that the code directs the historic preservation officer to do in 35619, and then gives us the ability to refer items to the HCRC if there's if it's not clear with the documentation that we have available. So for those that receive the demolition notices, I mentioned there's a few things that come through those notifications. This is one of them. So when there's a primary structure in a historic district that is under review for non-contributing determination, that gets the same notice that a demolition permit receives. There's also a formal application. So, we are doing these upon request through application by a property owner. So I think, back in the old days when people were first starting to do historic preservation in their cities, there was a perception that when a district is created, we decide then what's contributing and what's not. And that's not really how it works today, because our historic districts are evolving, and what was historic 50 years ago is different than what we consider historic now. And so generally our policy is that we consider everything to be contributing in a historic district until a determination is made otherwise. And that can only be done through this application. When we do get the application and we do the review, we're generally looking at the construction date, the type of building, the presence of original building materials, and its relationship to other structures or the context within its district. Again, not all districts are alike. Some are more residential, some are more commercial. And so the type of structure and its use might also inform that decision making. A term that also is used a lot in the profession is intrusion. And so intrusion would be something that's kind of coming in and it's different in appearance and type and construction date than something else. So that's another kind of way to look at it. We do research. We treat it just really kind of like a demolition permit review. And so we do all the research that we would normally do to confirm some of these things that are mentioned in the first bullet. And again, like I said, districts evolve over time. And so we're considering the construction date and the period of construction for the district and those types of things.
So can I ask a question? So why doesn't the applicant have to pay for that determination?
They do. It's the same fee as a historic assessment. We don't charge for residential, but we do charge for commercial.
So all the work, and I know there's a lot now, especially that's been going into what's contributing and not contributing, it's incredible, the documentation that you all do, that nobody has to pay for that?
Commercial property owners do. And
But
here's
not,
some
okay.
Yeah, and here's some examples we're going to go through.
Okay.
Just for context, like these are the types of buildings that Jenny's correcting me. She says we do for residential. I'm sorry, for a primary residential, but not for accessories. Yeah. So it's the same form as a historic assessment because of what you said. We're doing the same level of work. So it's $150.
Yeah. Oh, good. At least there's that.
Yeah, which is not enough, but it's something.
Well, no, because it costs a fortune when someone comes in and wants to demolish something. At least it has for us to go and do all the research of the reason why it is contributing.
Yeah. So
these
are a couple of examples of non-contributing requests that refer to the HCRC because we weren't comfortable making that determination just based on the information we had. And so, yeah, the building on the left is in King William, or was in King William, and probably was not considered contributing when King William became a district, but we certainly look at it now and we look at its construction date and we consider the fact that it's a mid-century investment in the district when the area was being revitalized. And so that's something we consider. The one on the right is in the Mission Historic District. And even though it's a more industrial building, industrial buildings are actually typical of the Mission Historic District. There's different kind of commercial nodes and industrial centers. And so that is also of significance, and so we consider those. The ones that we're more confident in approving are the ones that are really not in keeping with the context of the neighborhood, are clearly kind of later construction periods, or lack original materials. And so these are just a few examples of kind of more industrial types, and then also just later construction periods that were not as compatible with historic districts.
Corey, could I ask a question? This is Tony. Currently, demolition notices are sent out for principal structures only and not accessory structures?
Correct.
So if you have a contributing accessory structure that's on a demolition, that's gone through a demolition permit process, I guess the question is, why aren't neighborhood associations notified through the demolition notification program that there is a demolition request for an accessory structure? And The reason I ask is because we've had 2 or 3 here within the last 6 to 8 months, 2 or 3 demolition requests for accessory structures which were contributing, but I don't recall actually seeing these demolition notices going out via email.
So a contributing accessory goes to HCRC. And so that is the normal HCRC notification. That's an HCRC case. The ones,
Go ahead.
the ones that we notice are a demolition. We're talking about like 3 different kind of buckets of things. Non-contributing status determination requests for an accessory do not get noticed. I think, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, what I'm saying is we've had 3 demolition requests for an accessory structure which is contributing to Monte Vista, but I do not recall, or Monte Vista does not recall receiving your demolition and designation.
Because those are HCRC cases, and so they're on the preliminary agenda, and they show up that way.
Okay, but they do not show up via the email notification.
The email notification is not required by code, and so it does not follow the same kind of requirement that an HCRC case does. It is our policy that we've developed to make sure that people are aware of things that are incoming, but we don't do that for everything. We only do it for primaries.
Okay.
Corey, I have a question about the previous slide. These non-contributing determinations, when the office determines that they are non-contributing, what is that report like, and or the assessment like? What kind of document is that? And is that shared with the respective neighborhoods or historic districts so that they can be kept up with that action?
Yes. So in the previous slide, maybe I didn't say this. Oh yeah, primary structures and historic districts receive a 30-day notification. So that's that same email list that we talked about. That's like a few things. So it's demolition alerts, but also when there's this type of request for a primary, that's included in those alerts. And so you can follow it. If you're interested, just let staff know. It is the, Jenny, I don't know how available you are to jump in and respond, but the work is very similar to a historic assessment. I don't know that we produced a polished report like we normally would for a historic assessment request, but the documentation is captured in writing.
Okay, because I believe on one of those examples, we received maybe a timeline, a minimal text timeline of the construction, but we really didn't receive any in-depth writing or report or assessment that talked about the structure historically, what it served, what the construction type was, ownership years. We never received anything like that. So we're still kind of in the dark to what primary structure we lost earlier this year in our historic district.
Yeah, I mean, there is not much of a minimum requirement. There is a section in code that talks about our authority to do that. In previous years, it was literally like the application just had a place to stamp on the back and there was very little documentation. So I know what you are seeking. We are doing quite a bit more than we used to do to document these things, and the research is there. But there's not a template under which these things go into all the time.
Okay.
If it's something that is escalated to an HCRC case like these, then obviously that will result in a staff recommendation and sometimes a statement of significance that is provided. The other thing that could happen is somebody might come to us and ask for a more thorough historic assessment that is on file, and so sometimes we have those as well that just provide some information. And the result of those might be non-contributing status determinations for multiple buildings. Sometimes somebody submit that for like a complex, but generally for these smaller scale residential ones, especially the ones that we've researched and feel like there's not much there, I don't know that there's a report always.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think anything we can do moving forward to prevent something like that from happening again I think we'd all be in support of. And part of that is that notification now. So anytime we lose a primary building, whether it's contributing or not, really does open up the lot to something that we don't know. You know, there was no reason for it to come down anyway. It wasn't a dangerous structure. It's still a vacant lot. So anything we can do to create more notification would be great.
Yeah, and I mean, as you'll recall, we've talked about this one, and we actually adjusted the policy as a result because we learned that some people weren't getting the notices that we thought. So we've expanded the opportunity for that.
Yep. Y'all have learned so much from our experiences. I'm happy for that.
So this is actually we're talking about UDC amendment. So this is the actual proposed amendment related to non-contributing buildings. We are looking at several definitions of the code. Sometimes the definitions do more than we want them to. Like sometimes definition can create more questions than answers. And so we are wanting to relate this definition back to the process. And so there is a process established in 35619 that speaks to the decision and what happens. And just a simple statement that non-contributing buildings or resources are generally considered intrusions to a historic district and may include recent or non-compatible construction types and forms. The last thing we want is somebody arguing that their building is not contributing because of how the definition is written. The thing that is especially problematic about the existing definition is no longer retains integrity. Traditionally, this makes people think that if it's been modified, then it doesn't retain integrity and therefore it's not contributing. And that's not really what we look at. Again, we're looking at this kind of stuff. So, you know, just because a house has vinyl siding on it doesn't mean it's not contributing. It's still of the same construction date, building type, everything else for the district and is contributing.
So when a person comes in that wants to demolish and wants you to, and it has to be decided if it's contributing or not, then they pay for this. And then they have that next slide that you just showed. So if it's got, you know, plastic siding on the side of a building, then you have to tell them, no, it's contributing. Or vinyl, I guess it's called.
So if there's ever a case where, so if somebody requests a non-contributing status determination and we review it and we say it's contributing, those would go to the HCRC. And so we've had a few the past year where somebody wants to address the question to the commission and then the commission makes a determination. So it wouldn't necessarily stop at the staff level in those instances.
So there's no administrative approval for contributing or non-contributing.
It is a decision by staff to issue the non-contributing status determination. If we don't, it can go to the HCRC for a recommendation back to staff. So we do make the decision ultimately, but sometimes with HCRC's recommendation. And again, just to remind you, all this does is inform the demolition process. So if there is a approval of a non-contributing status determination, so something's determined non-contributing, then it means it's eligible for administrative approval of demolition.
Okay, so this is where it ties into your standard review, where administrative approval would be for demolition of non-contributing structures following assessment. Is that what we're saying here then?
Correct. And that was already allowed under section 35619. So we're clarifying in the administrative approval section there. And we're saying it's the standard type, like it's going to be the longer version.
Okay, got it now. Now it's a little bit clearer.
I know it's, you know, there's a lot of kind of crossover here and it can be confusing. Okay, I think we got to keep going. So another question has come up. This usually relates to new construction. And like I said earlier, those cases tend to be the most complicated. There's usually more questions than not at the time of HCRC review of a new construction case. And let me start by kind of stepping back and speaking a little bit to the formal permitting process. And so when something comes to the city for a decision on a permit, there's a submittal process that's involved that requires your construction documents, your permit set essentially, and it's going to go through all the different disciplines. And so DST is going to review it for building code, for mechanical code, all of those things. They're going to review it for development code, which is your zoning setbacks and height and lot coverage and all of those things. Public Works is going to review it for traffic and also for stormwater when the type of project necessitates that. It's not going to be every project, but larger projects, commercial obviously do. And then also we're going to do our review when we're flagged in a historic district or for a historic landmark or for downtown or Rio. And so in order for us to do our review, we have to have a COA in place. And so something's got to go to the commission before we can sign off on the permit. What sometimes happens is most people prefer to come to the commission first because they want to know if they're going to be approved by the HCRC before they finalize their permit drawings. And so what often happens is that they're at the HCRC with a plan that hasn't been vetted by these other review disciplines. So it maybe hasn't had a stormwater review, maybe hasn't had a traffic review, maybe it hasn't been to DST formally for development reviews, zoning setbacks, that type of stuff. And so we are cognizant of that. We are sensitive to those concerns. We do coordinate with DST if there's ever a question that we have when we're reviewing an application about setbacks or height, because we do want to make sure that whatever the commission is approving is permittable in most cases, or at least be able to inform the applicant if following approval by the HCRC if a variance would be needed. So just because it doesn't meet permit requirements doesn't mean the HCRC couldn't take action. It just might require a variance later on, which is another public hearing. There's a few things to consider. Tony's email tonight mentioned PPRs, which is a pre-plan review. That is a process facilitated by development services where somebody who has a larger complicated project can request a meeting. They actually pay for that meeting by discipline. And so they're determining where their questions are. If they have a question about stormwater, if they have a question about energy code, they're going to pay to have that person in the room. And often we're in that room as well. So if somebody's in a historic district, they will ask for OHP staff to be there so we can address any sort of concerns. That is a in-person, I guess we've been doing virtual, but it's usually just a meeting that happens. It's 1 hour maybe. And so we're getting to look at the plans pretty quickly. And this is before a permit is submitted. It's pre-plan. And that feedback informs them what they're going to expect in the process for permit review. It might inform revisions, but it doesn't take the place of the permit. Like a decision only happens when the review happens. And so I think that's important to consider. We had a recent case, and I think Barbara and Gemma will know what I'm talking about, where somebody came to HCRC and there were questions about zoning setback, and we got an email chain going between us and Kat with Development Services to make sure that the setbacks were generally consistent. And they provided some feedback that said, yes, we think that this meets zoning setbacks, but that email does not take the place of a permit review. It may still get to Development Services and they're going to do their permit review and say, you know what, here's something we didn't catch before. This needs to be changed to meet it. Like, just know that that is a completely separate, more formal process. What has been proposed is that in cases where something is coming to the HCRC where there's a lot of outstanding questions, that ideally there would have been some sort of version of a pre-plan review or some sort of coordination with Development Services or Public Works or whoever is appropriate to have some of these answers to questions at the commission level. And I agree that that benefits the process. And knowing commissioners, I know that they like to know that what they're seeing is not going to change greatly or not going to be problematic in the permitting process. However, it's also a completely separate process. The issues related to stormwater, traffic, zoning, those aren't really in the purview of the commission. What is in the purview of the commission is the application of the historic design guidelines. Now, where the gray area is that sometimes meeting other requirements of the development code changes the design that the HDRC does have purview over. And so that's where we've had these conversations at the commission level, and it is complicated. So I know several of you are interested in this concept. I don't know what the answer is at this time, but I do know what we can't do is require that formal permit review and building reviews happen before the HDRC can consider it. I think those are separate things, but I do think we can find a way to at least make sure that there's a process in place by which these kind of questions can be answered, so that the HDRC can make an informed decision. Just know that I don't think any of that would be sort of final. I think only, when the permit review happens, could there be any finality to that decision?
Corey, as you well know, design is based on the site plan, zoning, setbacks, height restrictions. They all impact design. That doing this preliminary review and just bringing your design, they can tell you 335 trail. We knew we had substandard streets. You have to have fire, turnaround. So we brought all those things to the table. I mean, if the neighborhood knows that, these are simple things. They don't have to get a full review. We're not asking them to be permitted, but we're asking that information then is given to you. And because that really does impact the design. The one that went through yesterday, I don't know, we do not have that, the neighborhood does not have the knowledge that what he went through. Did he get all of this? From all the architects and everyone in the neighborhood, it was a plan that really doesn't meet the setbacks. They're too close together. Even the interpretation of the two buildings on the lot are questionable in how that was done. We'd feel better if we know that there was some of these things brought forward and then, that it's reported. So the neighborhood also knows. I think it facilitates the neighborhood looking at the project, and it really helps the HDRC in evaluating a design. Why waste your time on something that is going to have problems? And I know it keeps coming back to you once it's permitted, but having this up front, just even a modified preliminary, if we can work that out with DSD, will save so much time for HDRC, so much time for neighborhoods, so much time for you. Thank you.
Tony, were you saying something?
No, I think Gemma expressed our experience here in Malta Vista on several issues in the past couple of years. So I think she explained it rather nicely and was pretty succinct in the description.
Corey, I'll also say I agree because think about the time that has been spent on some of these projects to rectify these inconsistencies. And this goes directly to one of your goals or the office's goals to reduce commissioners' times on projects, staff time on project. I think this addressing these things ahead of time can really be a good technique.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to toe the line between providing the information and then also making them the arbitrators of that information. We're not telling them that they need to necessarily make a decision on stormwater, but at least that question would have been answered potentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, well, I mean, this is obviously an ongoing conversation, and I think we'll definitely need to loop DSD in and kind of see what this looks like. I do expect that there would be a cost associated with doing this, and so then there's also a question of if this even can be required. Obviously, we always encourage this, but we'll have to have that conversation and see what it would look like.
Well, here's the thing: the cost that's charged for this, is nothing compared to the cost that it takes for neighbors and to do the work to see how the design is influenced by these things.
Yeah,
It's
I'm not saying
cost
it's
a
be too
fortune
expensive.
No, but it is really expensive in terms of human capital to try to get to the bottom of what the design is trying to do. And think about trail, which this was a major part of that, of that project, and how long it took, and how much craziness it took, and how many meetings it took. And so now, that's why I think that we need to really look at this, and also it'll give the commission members information that they need to decide if they should even if the design's even going to happen, and it will, because that's going to change totally on this particular one that happened yesterday because of so many problems that they're going to have with permitting.
Yeah,
And what they do is, remember what they said last time? It's like, oh, well, HDRC told us everything was fine. OHP said everything's fine. And then, and then even they said, remember the thing when they said, oh, the River Authority said it was just fine. And we went down there the next day and Suzanne Scott was like, what are you talking about? See, in other words, we don't have a honest meter at the podium.
Right. And we're never going to be able to fix that. But I do think where there has been opportunity to coordinate those things, those questions, we can start talking about documenting them so that it's part of the record.
Well, the other thing is that, I'm sorry, Tony, to interrupt you, but the other thing is that the person that was working on this issue yesterday has had about 6 or 7 different iterations. And so my question, after I did find out he'd gone down to zoning, was, which one did he show? So when you dealt with zoning, did you show them what he was in the package, the HDRC package?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I don't, actually, let's talk about this offline.
Well, okay, but this is, that's fine, but other historic districts are having this same issue. And I think it keeps people from wanting to get involved because it's onerous.
Sure.
So maybe we should have a historic district coalition meeting about this,
Okay. And then lastly, this is kind of housekeeping. There is reference to non-local designation types. So state archaeological landmarks, recorded Texas historical landmarks, National Register. That is very old language, probably remnants from the original ordinances. And really kind of what happened is when the initial Historic Preservation Act in the 60s occurred and cities were now enacting their own preservation ordinances, there was very little guidance that was available to cities. It was a new thing. And so the state actually provided language that municipalities could use in creating their initial ordinances. And it references using these kind of national and state level designations as basically a way to maintain and preserve local landmarks. And really, that's just not the case anymore. We have to have a property needs to be locally designated with local zoning in order to be regulated by the city. Like, we can't regulate a property that is not designated just because it's on the National Register. Now, what we are required to do as a certified local government with the state is to kind of keep tabs on permits that do impact those and provide notification to the state when appropriate. And so we're proposing, this is actually language that is in the section that speaks to when a COA is required. And so we're striking it here. We're saying that we can't require a COA just because something is a state or national landmark. But we are saying that these type of designations would be considered potentially eligible resources. They're maintained on an inventory, there's that word again, so that we can kind of keep track of those other historic resources in our city that are not necessarily locally designated. So we don't review them for COAs, but we do monitor and we do maintain an inventory of those sites. And this is actually guidance that came from the state
Well, they're crazy.
A couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, when they realized that a lot of local governments still had this language in their codes, and so it is recommended that it be removed. So
Corey, who up at the state actually tells you all what the language should be?
Well, nobody's saying they're saying what language shouldn't be there, which is this
Right.
language.
Well, same thing. Who
There's
actually?
So I mentioned the Certified Local Government Program, and so that's sort of the coordination program for municipalities that are meeting their obligations under the Preservation Act. And so we do reporting with them. We do what is required to maintain in good standing, and that qualifies the city for grant programs and other resources through the state. And so, yeah, through the Certified Local Government Program, that coordinator I had a conversation with, and they provided this guidance to.
And that's a state agency?
The Texas Historical Commission.
Is it under this Texas Historical Commission?
Yes.
Okay. And then let me ask you another question about this language here. So you have all this red, gone through, we're getting rid of that. But then it says property within the River Improvement Overlay District, property within a Mission Protection Overlay District, public property, public rights of ways, or public art. So why is this language we're adding right now?
Nope, the black is existing language. And so this is anywhere that a COA could be required. And so we are striking the language where we cannot require a COA, and we're moving it to better address how we use that information.
I see. Because I was wondering if there's more than one Mission Overlay District.
There's technically 4, but they're all the same kind of type. Yeah.
They're for the 4 missions on the south side?
For Southern Missions.
Thank you.
So finally, there's also been questions about when the public input process starts, and what I want to really convey is that it's now. Again, to repeat what I said, is that we want any amendments that we draft to be reflective of all of the input to date as much as possible. We don't want to put something out there and say, okay, now let's start talking about it. Like, I'm happy to talk about it now. And I think you all know how to reach me, and through meetings like this, and then also this Saturday, we want to provide an in-person option where we can kind of dig into things. I don't really even have a presentation planned. I mostly just want to be available to sit down and talk about some issues, and we can kind of brainstorm. If there are items that you would like me to present on, then I can prepare for that. So feel free to let me know. You can do that. By emailing me directly or at info@sapreservation.com. We are interested in addressing feedback as soon as possible. And then as some of these new kind of ideas and concepts come out, we'll start setting up separate meetings to kind of hash those out. And if there are related amendments, we can talk about what this would look like. Any questions? We're over time, but I'm happy to stay a little bit later if anybody would like to discuss anything else.
All I know is it's complicated.
It's complicated.
We'll see you
I
Saturday.
love you, Tony.
Good night. Thank you,
Good
Corey.
night.
Sorry, see you Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Okay, leave.